Ahoy! The devs talked about the perk removal again today, and we've got some spicy details that go beyond just Ward and Bane. Transmog was also introduced today, so we'll talk about that a little bit too. Starting with what the devs announced, they want you to go for perks that change your builds instead of just being a chore. They also want to allow people to experiment, and certain perks in the game currently just make that impossible pretty much. The main perks in question are Ward, Bane and Resilient. The first question that was immediately brought up is what happens to all the gear that we worked really hard for? Is that just gonna be taken away? Apparently there was a last minute change to their answer here, so they gave us a screen with the new answer instead. And it seems these perks will now be replaced by new perks that provide different utility. One of the perks was mentioned here as an example, which is a health perk that simply increases the player's max health. Now, if this was announced in a vacuum, this would honestly sound a bit concerning, and it's not entirely without concern. Because obviously there would be a pretty good chance that health just becomes the new mandatory perk. In PvE, you typically don't have 3 good perks, so you would just grab health as one of the useful perks, so that is at least somewhat useful. And in PvP, extra health would be very valuable, especially because it could mean that you could run lower con and run more damage perks as well. So yeah, that could be a problem in itself. But I think it's worth keeping in mind here that not only do PvEers especially like having higher damage over having more health, especially speedrunners, but also the health perk may not be the only one. They're saying they're introducing multiple new perks, so it's possible that there are other perks that provide different kinds of utility or have different impact on your build and become a lot more effective for whatever you're trying to achieve. This would also go in line with a statement they made later, saying that they want every perk in the game to be viable in some way. But before we get there are some more perks that will be adjusted. So they specifically stated that gear above 625 gear score won't have any resilient, ward, or resistance either. So that one is getting removed too, so that's for example corruption resistance, which was always a very annoying perk. What's also very notable here is that they said gear above 625. So we have confirmation now that the gear score will not just be reworked in a way that may decrease it and just reset it entirely, but it will be increased in some way. There will be something above 625. This isn't necessarily surprising, it's what most of us suspected, but it's good to have confirmation here. There are also perks that will be outright removed, such as indestructible. They said they specifically removed perks that were never going to be viable. Some perks were created years ago and made sense at that point when the game was entirely different, when it was maybe more of a survival game still, but no longer do. They didn't go into specifics here, so we can only speculate. I could, for example, imagine something like luck being removed, or I could imagine something like transient crits being removed, some like super outlier perks. We don't know, we'll have to see. But for now, they didn't give us anything specific yet, they just said some perks are gonna go away. Along with that, underperforming perks will also be rebalanced, and overperforming perks will be nerfed. One example they mentioned here was Attunement, which might see a slight increase in cooldown. I don't think many people would be upset about that one, considering how annoying Attunement is to get and how valuable it is on most weapons currently. I think most other perks should be more on the same level. And that was then followed by the statement I already mentioned earlier, that the goal is to have any perk in the game be viable somehow. They're also adding other new perks. So for example, they want to add more healing perks, like Blessed, that are conditional instead. For example, one that may somehow be affecting you when you are getting hit by damage over time effects. Since Ward and Bane are being removed, there are also some adjustments for Expedition specifically, in the form of Ward Potions. Ward Potions will now last the whole Expedition, so you're gonna use your corrupted Ward Potion if you're going into Tempest, for example. Which is interesting because it also means you can no longer use Ward Potions as a safety net for clutch situations in the Expedition. It might be possible that if Ward Potions become a permanent buff, you can kind of stack them with Absorption Potions for specific elemental effects though. So in a risky situation you would just chug a Fire Absorption Potion, for example. They also pointed out that this gives them the option to add more different enemy types in an expedition. In other words, they are expecting you to use multiple potions per expedition if there are multiple types in that expedition. So it doesn't sound like they're cutting down on the variety of different types within an expedition, but rather they're just going to say, suck it up, use another ward pot. It's going to be interesting what economic impact that has, because depending on the expedition it may be kind of expensive to run it if you need to chug a lot of potions, but it's worth keeping in mind that we don't even really know if we can prepare for that. On one hand, the potion recipe may not stay the same, like they changed it for acid tinctures when they became more relevant, And on the other hand, there might be a new tier of those potions anyways, if my speculation is correct and we're getting a new crafting tier. In that case, you're not really going to do much with the old potions, they're just going to be more of a backup. This would have been a Patreon early trading tip if I was more confident in this, but since I'm not, I'm just going to say it here. You can consider buying up some Earthshell Tail, because that's the primary protective reagent for any kind of ward potion. But again, no idea if it's still going to be used for the recipe, and if yes, if it's going to be outclassed quickly anyways. For trading tips that I'm more confident in, feel free to support me on Patreon, like these lovely people. But there's more. There's also an attribute change, specifically for armor that currently has split attribute. As of now, armor like that has one attribute that has a higher amount and one attribute that has a lower amount. So for example, you have a perk that has more strength and less con. That right now would be the suffix of the barbarian. And on the other hand, you could have something that has more con and less strength, which would be of the knight. This will be going away. Split perks will still exist, but as even split. So 50-50 strength con in this case. The goal here is obviously to trim down both on craft mods as well as on different armor pieces and weapons in the game, because for every single one of those you have probably a separate ID and whatnot, and they did say recently that they want to declutter the game, and this seems to be the start of it. While they did confirm that these old split craft mods will be going away, they did not tell us what will happen with them. So you basically have two options now. You can panic buy those perks, or you can panic sell them, and either could go right or wrong. My speculation is that the perk mods that have the current split stats will likely all be converted into craft mods that have the new 50-50 split. That would seem like the most logical option with the smallest amount of losses and just what makes sense. And on the topic of craft mods, when they talked about Ward and Bane, they were only talking about what you have on your gear. They didn't really mention specifically what will happen to the craft mods there, and likewise other ones like Indestructible. So a big question mark for now. I could both imagine quite a few of them being converted, especially into the new health perk, as well as maybe some also just being made obsolete and being some grey item in the inventory that you can no longer use. Who knows? The community questions they asked were, if you could buff any perk, what would it be? And if you could cut out any perk from the game entirely, what would that be? But something else was changed today, and that was Transmog being enabled. Unfortunately, on that end, we have some less positive news. So the most important thing works. Your current gear is getting stored as Transmog options, and you can then scrap that gear and don't have to worry about it anymore. That's the very good thing. That's the most important thing to me personally. But since this wasn't on the PTR for whatever reason, there are issues. Mainly that the preview is simply not working properly a lot of the time. You can see some examples here where I just supposedly am previewing multiple items, but they're just not showing and they're all highlighted. So yeah, that's pretty messy and pretty frustrating because you can't really put an outfit together. What worked for me was searching out the item names and then previewing them. That for some reason was possible. I don't know what's causing it. Maybe it's because it's too many people using it at once or whatever, but right now the feature is not yet working as it should be. Also, unless I was unable to find it, so far there is no option to preview a die on an armor while using the preview feature while not having it unlocked yet. And that is pretty annoying if you're trying to piece together a set that's not just one named set all put together, but from multiple different sets, some kind of mix and match thing. Because the problem with dye is that it can look drastically different on different kinds of armor textures. As such, if you have a specific set in mind and you want to try out things, you may not want to salvage those pieces yet, because the only way that you can test color combinations that I know of so far is by actually equipping the pieces and using the dye then. Otherwise you'd have to unlock them with Transmog first, and then you may find out that the colors don't actually match well, it doesn't work well, and then you just transmog it for nothing, so you want to avoid that. Another problem is, especially if you're trying to piece a set together and you're previewing multiple pieces, that simply left-clicking on the left side of your screen where the preview is, which you would normally maybe just do like to move the camera or something, will immediately close the Transmog vendor, and then you have to start all over again. Very frustrating, very annoying. Again, something that could have been very easily caught in a quick PTR test. All in all, unless you have a specific simple set in mind already, I would recommend holding out just a little bit, waiting a little bit longer, especially because we're also probably going to get a ton of new gear sets with the expansion, so if you're not willing to overly spend on Transmog, then you may want to wait for those to make sure that you're not missing out on something really, really cool that will be coming in just 1.5 months. And on the topic of Transmog, in the next days I'll talk about a couple of cool looking and easy to get sets that you may be interested for Transmog. If you'd like to see that video, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified. If you're interested in more expansion info like the potential level increase and potentially higher trait skill max, then I will link a video that I made about that right here. Once again, thanks to my patrons for supporting me, you already saw their names earlier. And thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.